to safety. I don't know where the safety was. And then today I have a Pakistani friend.
Safety means like a safety house, safety.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, and my Pakistani friend said they're having some success getting people, young women in particular, I guess, out of Pakistan. And
out of Pakistan to the U.S.
Well, I don't know. I know they're a U.S.-based group, but yeah, to some place where they could study, I suppose. Or because boy, things are not opening up. I had some hope about this Russian medical school with a nursing school, but all the nursing school courses are in Russian. That would be asking an awful lot of somebody to, start studying in a new language.
So I just looked at Madre. I heard of it, but I couldn't remember. And it's global women's rights. And actually, one of the policy and campaigns officer is somebody I know that you may know, Kate Alexander, who was with the Action New York State. So she's with them now.
That's good to know. I do know her.
Yep. She's a very lovely young woman. Yeah. She's living out west somewhere, Arizona or New Mexico. I think it's Arizona. And she was just actually in the apartment right next to Hassan. El
Tayab. Okay.
How do you pronounce it?
El Tayab.
Tayab, of course. But anyway, it's a small world, that's for sure.
Wow. Huh.
So, well, I think we'll be, how close are we getting, Richard?
Doesn't it show on the screen? Facebook is ready when you're ready?
Oh, no, it doesn't show anything like that, no.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, Facebook's ready when you're ready.
Oh, okay, well, we're ready, so we'll start. Everyone's ready? Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to
got your timer
start
set?
I have my timer set, and I will.
Okay, when you clap your hands in front of the screen, you're on the air.
Thank you. Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future, also the home of our friend and producer, Richard Wicca. Thank you, Richard. And we also thank our friends at WBNY, Buffalo's original alternative radio station, 91.3 FM, out of Buff State. Thank you, Buff State and WBNY. And when we think about thankfulness, we think about our indigenous friends, we think about the fact that we're on stolen Haudenosaunee land, and that through all the violence and trickery and suffering that they have had, they are still overarching feeling is one of thankfulness, and that discipline and habit, practice of thankfulness. So they start every meeting and gathering by thanking all and acknowledging and thanking all the people who are there, Mother Earth, and all of the different creatures of all kinds, and the flora and fauna, all the vegetation and the trees, all the elements, and all the everything in the heavens, and then of course the love that brings us all together, and especially the Creator and the original instructions that we've all received that we should be following so that life could continue in this creation. So then they say Yahweh, and then the people say Nyo. So I'll say Yahweh, say Nyo.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that's it, thankfulness, the thankfulness. So I'm very thankful to have some special guests on this show where we're going to have an update on Afghanistan. So we have two experts in the field, and I'll just go counterclockwise like our Haudenosaunee friends do. So we'll start with Basir Bita, who is joining us actually from Vancouver. This is the glories of Zoom, who is an Afghan, a refugee, a family man a pillar of the community and has done so much to help so many people there still now, and when we were there, and now helping people who are there and who've gotten out. So welcome, Basir.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for having me today.
Tashakur.
Such a pleasure.
Tashakur. One of the only few words I know in Dadi. So we're very grateful for you, Basir, for all the work that you're doing, and also for coming on the show for that too.
Thank you.
And then, of course, our friend of the show, you've been on a few times too, Kathy Kelly, Kathy, you know, I always mention that you've been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize a number of times, and you certainly have deserved it more than a number of times. And just all the work you did with Voices in the Wilderness, Voices for Creating Nonviolence, and now for World Beyond War. So where you're on the board and still working away in so many ways. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, Vicki. Good to be here, and good to see Basir Bita as well.
Yeah, it's great to have you both here, and it's, you know, I feel the joy of having you here, but then it's a really difficult topic because people have suffered so much already and still are. So, although there are some bright spots, but so when we're thinking of Afghanistan, if we can just, I should have said that, of course, Kathy, you've been there so many times and so deeply involved with helping people in Afghanistan. So when we think about Afghanistan, and this conversation and the issues that we're going to be talking about, if we have a little quick go round on just a couple of thoughts about values, the values that you each want us to be thinking of in this connection. So I will go around in the same, you know, circle. So Basir and then Kathy. So Basir.
So when I, to give you a broad picture of what's going on in Afghanistan, in terms of women's rights, women are still struggling to have access to their basic rights as a part of human beings. They don't have access to education. I know that there were some campaigns inside Afghanistan and outside by Afghans and internationals to pressure over the Taliban to resume the schools and let girls continue their educations. But the results of all their efforts have not been fruitful yet. As for the economy, I can give you the examples of my own brothers, relatives, and parents who have been jobless since the fall of Kabul, more than 11 months, almost a year now. The banking system is polarized. The chances, based on some rumors, the chances that the entire country fall into another civil war are high. There are some people uprisings here and there in some parts of the country. There seems to be public uprising, more particularly in Panjshir province, which is violent. And the violence is widespread, and the U.S. government has frozen $10 billion that is Afghan people's assets. And who pays the price for such an freezing the money? No one but the general public. The Taliban, those who are in power, they have their own revenue sources. They know how to manage their expenses. But who pays the general public? The prices for all commodities have skyrocketed already. The prices, as an example, the price for charcoal, which is one of the main fuel for Afghans to keep inside warm during freezing winter, has tripled in the summer, and you know that it will keep going up in the winter.
Right.
The borders I've heard recently that the Pakistani government has stopped exporting commodities from Pakistan or anywhere who use Pakistani borders into Afghanistan. The Iranian government has started deporting Afghans who escaped the country right after the fall of Kabul back to Afghanistan. This is the general pictures. I will provide further details as we continue.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so disturbing, and as you mentioned, women's rights are so critical, and they say, you know, it's one of the biggest factors in how well a country is doing in every measure of health and happiness is the women's rights. So, and there's so many other very distressing things that your compassion and your concern, you know, are sharing. You know, it's so concerning. Kathy, you want to?
Maybe just to add that Amnesty International today put out a report written by Agnes Kayamard saying that the rights of women and girls are being devastated. Basir and I sometimes hear stories from young people. We've heard young girls say, our family is so desperate economically that they can't feed all the mouths of the people in the family, and that leads to young women being put into forced marriages.
Right.
And that's a terrible setback for young women who thought that, you know, they were beyond those kinds of practices. We hear from people who are in more rural provinces who weren't able to plant crops because they couldn't get water, because the drought is so terrible. And, you know, when I think about what the United States spent on weapons, on bombings, on invasion, on occupation, on torture, and so many things that pulled Afghanistan apart. And then when you realize not only are we not paying any reparations, we've frozen their budget and said, no, this money is, if it ever gets freed up, maybe $3 billion, it will be under the auspices of United States aid. And, you know, even right now, we can talk about this more later if you like, but the United States Agency for International Development has just sort of said, take a hike to the SIGAR, the investigative arm of the government, and Special Inspector General on Afghan Reconstruction. And they said, you don't have any, what would we say, jurisdiction any longer over whether or not there's been any fraud or any waste or any abuse. And believe me, over the years, there was plenty. And, you know, the SIGAR reports, 55 of them did detail many, many, many ways in which the United States had contributed to fraud and corruption and benefited U.S. people. And there were plenty of Afghans who also lined their pockets. But for the United States to now say, you know, you can't have $7.9 billion of your assets that are in our banks, and then we're going to take $3 billion and give that to U.S. aid agencies who have no accountability to anyone. It just seems like again and again the mode of operation toward Afghanistan is predicated on violence, the kind of violence that says your children can starve before your eyes, and we won't care.
Right. Right. That it is incredible and infuriating to hear the level of inhumanity, the level of just absolute wanton destruction and lack of care and concern for people that we have already put through the ringer over the period where we could have, for 20 years, when you think of what could have been done if our values said we put people first, we put the well-being first, we uphold our values, we uphold the women, we uphold the children, right? Instead, our government spent all kinds of money on the bombing and on fighting and on, as you said, all the graft and corruption that is detailed in those reports, or at least the questions about so much of the money that all of a sudden disappeared. And, that the value, it has never been any kind of care and concern for the people in Afghanistan, and it continues now that there's no care and concern. How we can hold on to their money, it's 10, 11 billion altogether, right? That is just being confiscated, and that is the money of the people, not of the Taliban. So we have no right to do that, none whatsoever. And as you were saying, maybe we leap to that the SIGAR reports, didn't you say at this point, our government they don't even care what the reports are telling.
Well, I should be a little more specific.
Sure.
Samantha Power is in charge of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID,
Right.
and Anthony Blinken is in charge of the State Department. And they both told the SIGAR director that you no longer have jurisdiction over what we do. We're not going to cooperate with your investigations. And if anybody in our organizations cooperates with you, they have to first seek permission from us. So that means if somebody wants to be a whistleblower, they have to first ask the person they might want to blow the whistle on, can you please give me permission to do that? So I was kind of surprised. Senator Grassley, who is definitely not a flaming liberal by any stretch, wrote a very stern letter to both Anthony Blinken and Samantha Power. And he said, you better, within 15 days, in fact, he said by July 15th, I want answers to these questions. Why do you think you can overturn United States laws, and what gives you the right to do this? So, I should have called his aide and said, so did you get those answers yet?
Right, sure.
But I think that's the kind of thing that we can all ask our members of Congress to pay attention to. But meanwhile, the more important thing really is what can the world community do to try to help people stave off starvation.
Right.
One thing we have an ad hoc international committee that Basir and I participate in, which meets twice a month via Zoom. And, we try to figure out, is there something we could do? So Basir has been very busy translating into Dari documents, like one describes how to plant an emergency garden and hope that people might be able to cultivate potatoes or radishes, just enough to get by and have some kind of food. And then there's another document that's based on a book where there is no doctor that will try to help communicate about basics of nutrition and first aid and preventing disease. But, I almost think, I hope it's not hurtful when people who, don't have enough cash to feed their families get from us documents that say, well, try planting seeds when the planting season is ending now. But we have to do what we can. And I'm so grateful, Basir, to you. You never say no. And, we'll send them something to translate and it's back in our inbox the next day.
That's wonderful. That's the same group that is also, that I've been on, that's also working with people outside of Afghanistan also. So it's sort of serving those two purposes. So, and Basir, again, so I want to say the two of you, between the two of you in your different ways, Basir, just because of your depth of knowledge about Afghanistan and the people there and the needs there and what's going on right now. And Kathy, from all your years of working on U.S. abominable foreign policy, which it has only been bad to worse over the years, mostly. and all your work, you know, it was on Iraq as well as Palestine, as well as, you know, especially now Afghanistan, and just, you know, and really keeping your eyes on just how much just how much work we have to do to change, to stop being the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. So I want to say both of you really do such a wonderful job. But as far as what you said, it is true that one of the things we already know is that action is by its nature imperfect. So anything we do, there's ways, you know, it's so many different ways that it can be taken. So I think that this is a wonderful effort. You know, I saw the one about the suggestions for medical help. You know, what should people do on simple medical things? But I think, you know, just putting out, it was done very thoughtfully and sensitively. And it does offer people some guidance if they really don't know, you know, and there's a lot of thought to using things that people could get.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe speaking about the mental health, I would say, you know, no one can claim in Afghanistan that he's not traumatized.
Oh,
Everybody, the whole country is traumatized. Even the trauma, you know, when they immigrated, they brought themselves the traumatic experience that they have. In, you know, I am in close touch with a dozen of, or more than a dozen of people in the U.S. who recently arrived across the U.S. They are traumatized. They are, you know, they self-quarantined, not because of the COVID, but because they can't communicate. There's a new country, new barriers. They don't receive enough support from the U.S. governments or the community, particularly mental support. They don't know the language. No, pretty much everything is new to them, and they still struggle with the trauma. And sometimes, you know, the trauma is coupled or doubled or tripled when they arrive in a country that they have no idea what's going on. And, you know, one of the things that even increase such a mental pressure is bureaucracy. You have to give a call, you have to fill out forms, you have to meet new people, booking appointments. Going through, you know, this unfettered bureaucracy is another challenge. One of the things that I do sometimes is to get them together virtually to speak up, listen to their stories, to, you know, to help them through expressive writings, which is powerful for Afghans. And hopefully I can personally, in a personal capacity, to be able to provide, you know, some more time for Afghans and teach them how to experience themselves so that they may get healed after, you know, a while or so. Yeah, and I can also, you know, we can draw a picture of a detailed or more detailed picture of Afghanistan if we had negative things. Like recently I've noticed through media and communication with friends and my community back in Afghanistan, Kabul, that the number of people from younger generations committing suicide because of lack of access to education, to economic opportunities, things like that, has increased. The health situation, it's directly because of the mental situation, street robberies. I've recently been informed by a friend that another mutual friend was killed in a street robbery. People still, you can see on social media that people still say their children, particularly their daughters, or they leave them on the streets in the middle of the night. They leave them behind the door, just like the stories a few centuries ago. They knocked the doors, they ran away, and all of a sudden, the people inside the house find a kid, and which is horrible. Yeah.
It's so hard. It's so hard. I know you're hearing a lot of stories also, Kathy. And maybe if before you have to leave, that we talk some about the people that are that have managed to get out. So some people have managed to get out, and so that is that. And some of those people, even as you said, Basir, it's not that people don't have some difficulties when they're leaving after trauma, also not knowing the language, but there have been a few projects and different initiatives that have been very helpful, and that I think are doing some fundraising still too. Kathy, are there any stories you want to tell?
It's interesting. I think, I don't know if it's the same in Canada, Basir, but here in the United States, people, especially February, March, April, were just glued to television screens and watching footage from war in Ukraine and seeing a very different picture of refugees and treatment of refugees than what we see in our own country, which has so often been a picture of children caged at the border and of people being stigmatized and mistreated and rounded up and treated in subhuman ways. But you were seeing in Ukraine people saying, "Oh yeah, come and live in my home. I've got an extra room." To people who would approach the Polish border, or it's odd in a way, because now I read that in Ireland and in the UK, they're sending Afghans back to Afghanistan to make more room for Ukrainians, or the UK is sending some of their refugee population to Rwanda. So there's a certain racism present there, isn't there? And so when I think about people who are bringing so much eagerness and hope and desire to make a positive difference to our land, people who ought to be welcomed, people who will, continue what has been true of the United States since people took the land away from the native populations. Everybody came from someplace else.
Right.
But there is one kind of bright, shining example in all of this, and it comes from a small town in southern Portugal called Mertola. And it's one of those places on earth where...
Say the name again.
Mertola.
So how do you spell?
Mertola.
Right.
And it's an area where, because of climate catastrophe, and an arid land that's very vulnerable to desertification, the land has become unusable. It needs to be regenerated. And also that's led to young people saying, well, I'm not going to stay here. And so the city residency is depopulated. So they said, well, actually we could use some people who would come here and be part of a permaculture project. And gosh, we don't hear a hint of stigmatization of refugees, but rather this kind of open-armed welcome. We're so glad you're here. Let's celebrate your new year. Let's celebrate your feast. Let's learn about your culture. And it's just 8 people, one of whom is a little toddler and who seems like he's just won over the whole town.
Right.
But it's a good example of what can be, what really ought to be. And the permaculture project, it's kind of hard. They have to get up at 6 a.m. and, it's kind of hot and hard outdoor work and working in the greenhouse and planting the crops and clearing the land, but it's working. They've got abundant crops right now. And the other thing that's really amazing is these young people already have the same rights to social services, healthcare, education as any Portuguese person. And in time, they'll have the same passport that Portuguese people get, which is the one that enables you to go anywhere in Europe. It's the Schengen deal. So their lives have turned around in very significant ways. Through something utterly tragic, they may have moved into something that's actually quite positive, although I'm sure that they miss their families,
Right.
worry for their families,
Right.
and, we'll be glad for a time when they can, kind of see what kind of dreams and hopes they want to pursue. But for right now, Myrtala has been a very good place for them. And then again, with Basir's help, and I mean a lot of help, we were able to coordinate travel on the part of 5 people to join what we call the Women's Safe Space in Pakistan. And to keep it safe, we really have to be vague and not tell you much about where it is. Or
Don't need any of that. Right.
because but we're really hoping the best for that project. But we know 25 people now who are Afghans living in Pakistan needing to go to a better option, because Pakistan's overwhelmed with many years of refugees.
Right.
Their economy isn't doing all that well, and so people aren't given much freedom in Pakistan. Little things like they can't open a bank account, can't receive money through Western Union, can't go to teaching of English as a foreign language courses that are being offered. There's a lot of ways in which they're kind of shut out, and the many live in places where everybody else is Afghan as well. But it's not easy.
No.
It's not easy to feel accepted. So if anyone listening tonight has any ideas for us about scholarships or communities like permaculture communities that would welcome young people to be with them, we would be so grateful. And if anybody wants to join our Buddies Network, just get in touch, because we're happy to welcome people.
Sure. They can go through the Western New York Peace Center. Would be very easy. To me, is, one of the ways. So they could just, victoryross9@gmail.com. So
and we meet twice a month.
right.
And people can take on as much responsibility as they can manage, but there's lots of work that needs to be done.
Right. Well, one of the things that you're reminding me of, how much wonderful work was being done, in Afghanistan before everything turned. So there are people there who worked so hard, and these are some of the people that we're talking about that all of us have known, or some better than that. Of course, you were right there, Basir. I was only there for a very short trip, but a very short and wonderful time. But these young people are just so devoted, idealistic, selfless, working for the group, working for better community. And then when everything sort of blew up, they've been scrambling, and especially because they could be targets, because they were working for all the things, that would make for a beloved community where everyone's rights are respected and where everyone's needs are filled. So women's rights.
I have a story I could offer, Vicki.
Please.
After the Uvalde massacre of children, school children,
Right.
teachers, one of our young friends wrote to me and he said, "What can I do to help comfort those parents?" And he himself tries to comfort his own mother because his older brother was killed fighting for Afghanistan. He entered the military because of poverty, really, but that family always mourns that young man's death. And so I reminded my young friend, I said, "Do you remember that time when you and your friends collected as many toy guns as you could put your hands on, and you had all the street kids that came to your little street kids school bringing toy guns, and then you all went outside and you dug a grave for the guns and you buried them and you planted a tree on top of the grave, and a woman was an onlooker, and she rushed over and she understood what you were doing, and she said, 'I want to help plant more trees. And that was the kind of thing that, the young people in that group really understood. It was a very countercultural sort of thing to do, but they were serious. They wanted to tear down the walls, bury the guns, find ways for people to see a new way of being egalitarian and treating men and women equally. And it had tremendous, tremendous hope. They planted thousands of trees, manufactured many hundreds of warm blankets and distributed them to the poor, and gave widows the responsibility to make them, but then paid them something. And they had seminars, and the conference that you went to, Vicki, was a yearly annual event.
Right.
And then Basir, as a mentor to that group, really helped foster, because they got older and they got more capable and they had more insights and they could take on more responsibilities. So it really grew and flourished in many, many ways. And I know that for you, Basir, those kids were like family.
Exactly. Yeah. The story that you shared, was not only resonated me and also helped me recall those beautiful, nice days. The day that we buried some weapon toys under the ground. I can give you like tens of examples of the days that we walked outside. We just reached out to members of the community, asking them for assistance, like food bank, distributing duvet, planting trees, street kids, schools.
Right, the street kids school.
Yeah, street kids schools. That's another project. The projects that we were so close to establish the first Nonviolence Institute in the country. So close. It was last steps that we took in order to get our the documents to start our operations as independent Nonviolence Institute. But I'm sure that some days I will establish the institute. The groups and the young people were not only like my brothers and sisters, but they were the only source of inspiration in Afghanistan when I felt down, as a refugee born in Iran and, being traumatized in Iran and then come back to my own country to contribute to reconstructing the country. And then I was connected to the groups. The very day that I met our international mentor was that was a life mark that I will never forget it. And that was the day that I felt connected and I felt home. I never claimed in Iran, in Afghanistan, and even here in Canada that I feel home. But the only place that I felt home, and I still, when I'm, reviewing and flickering through those beautiful days and memories, I feel home and I feel connected.
It makes me think of, as Kathy you were telling the story in Portugal, that, there's one person over there who, made such she did it with your help and with help from both of you and other people who helped her. But, one person can make such a difference so that when they start to build community, because those things are catching, that loving connection it connects us and people gravitate towards it and then they emulate it. So the way the town is being, I think it's partly because of the way the young people were presented and the way the whole project was presented. And it's so wonderful, and it's what a difference a person can make one person in the way they sort of help the culture to develop and emphasize certain parts. I can't help mentioning too, Kathy, in what you said with the story, which I've heard you tell it before, but with the toy guns and everything. But that is just the story of the in the Haudenosaunee tradition. When they had started the Great Law of Peace, they took all their guns and they buried them. I don't know if I ever told you that before, but I just couldn't. The way you're telling it is almost straight out of that same tradition, that they buried the guns. They had under a tree, a great white pine tree. And that was the beginning of the Great Law, of really following the Great Law that all of the Haudenosaunee, or what some people had called the Iroquois, all did. So anyway, that it's also something that we find in different pockets, in different places. But what you said about war, that trauma of a war zone, is just the opposite. They're almost diametrically opposite.
We stay in touch with people from the emergency surgical centers for victims of war, and they do tremendous health care in 3 major hospitals and then about 41 first aid clinics. And they say that every day about 3 people come into their hospitals who've been wounded or maimed because of explosive ordnance that's still under the ground.
Okay.
And that's also part of the legacy that all of these invading forces have left. And it ought to be cleaned up, but the United States is gone, and boy, that takes a tremendous, meticulous effort to clean up all those kinds of explosives. But I hope we'll be able to hear from Basir his thoughts about permaculture. I know that you just went to a course, very hands-on course practicing permaculture, and that really does have to do with healing the land. I've learned so much from Eunice and Rosemary about the mapping and the very detailed, careful thought of how to grow food, but also grow communities. So I actually have a commitment that I have to go and fulfill, but I want to thank you for this time, and Basir, wishing you all the best. And Vicki, get well, and Richard, so wonderful of you to accompany us in this program.
Right, and send us a copy of that Grassley letter so we can help.
Yes.
That would be an idea of something that we can, promote and get people to do.
Great, I'll send that. Thank you
so much. Take care, Kathy.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. See you. So, oops, Basir, oops. Well, we have lost Basir. So I'll just see if he can come back in. In the meanwhile, it's very wonderful to remember the time I spent in Afghanistan. And I really, I will never forget it. The wonder of these young kids, how fantastic they were. So we need that kind of loving persistence that they show. So here, let me see if we can get Basir back on the phone, back in the studio. So if we can, that would be great. So if we can't, then I can tell you some stories of what I saw when I was there. So we'll see if we can get him. In the meanwhile, I can say that when I was there, it was 2018, and I was there during this Youth Peace Summit. It was an all-province Youth Peace Summit that was just a wonderful, extremely exciting opportunity to do with the kids in Afghanistan what we do with teens and young people here. And it's just as exciting as it can be to watch them really, get committed to nonviolence, find ways and imagine ways that they can really improve their community, and just do everything that they can to build beloved community, to take care of other people in the community who need their help. And that's what we are grateful for doing. So it's what they were doing right along. It's an exciting opportunity to meet kids who, in the middle of a war zone, are still looking after their community and trying to replenish the land, work on permaculture, study nonviolence. They were mentioning the duvet project that they did, where they were creating opportunities for seamstresses. They had money that was donated to pay seamstresses a living wage for them to go ahead and make a duvet, and then they distributed those duvets to families who were in danger of actually freezing to death. And people do freeze to death in Afghanistan, there's no question. And now, as desperate as times are, those times, which were hard enough then, looked very good compared to what's going on now. As you heard from Basir, things are very much worse now. And it's just a tragedy that people are suffering as much as they are. There's no jobs. There's, very little food. The economy has crashed. There's no money in the government budget for paying for people for doing a job. So how people are even continuing on right now is just hard to understand how they can even keep going. It's a terrible, terrible time for them. And yet, the people are there. There's good people with energy to do something, but the distrust, the extreme poverty, the extreme violence, as we know, those are the things that really cause a community to collapse. And the violence perpetuates violence. So, and that there's certainly plenty of violence coming from the Taliban, and then just the extreme poverty and need also is itself creates more violence. So it's a very, very tough situation. It really couldn't be tougher for the people who are there. So we're just very concerned. And this group that Kathy has been talking about, people are welcome to join that. We're trying to buddy people up with people, these Afghan youth, who some of them are in Pakistan, some of them are still in Afghanistan. And the ones who are in Pakistan are trying to get to another country that is more able to, and able to accommodate their needs, willing and able to accommodate. Of course, Pakistan has had refugees coming from Afghanistan for so many years because Afghanistan has had all those years of war. So we know it's been about, at least 30 years of war in Afghanistan, maybe 40. And it's just a very, very difficult time and very, I think in all of those times, those were tough times, very tough times, but I can't imagine that any of them are any worse than right now. So the other thing is, when you think about the opportunity cost of what was done with the money that we spent, we had, massive amounts of money and person power, manpower, largely manpower, person power, that we had in Afghanistan. And then how much good did it do? Did we rebuild their infrastructure or help them build infrastructure? No, not really. Did a lot of educating of people get done? That so much of the money was spent on armaments, on military operations, on drone surveillance, on fighting the Taliban, and not on developing the country and helping them to meet everyone's needs. So we really have a very, very difficult time just even imagining what it's like for people in Afghanistan right now, and also what it will be like in the winter, because we were just talking about people do starve. Well, of course, people starve to death. I was going to say do also freeze to death in the winter. And, with the climate catastrophe going on the way it is, extreme weather events and extreme temperatures are becoming more and more normal. So again, that means for people who are very poor that the suffering will be even greater. It's a terrible thing for the people, and a terrible, very difficult and very sad time for the people who are there, who really are at their wits' end of what to do. They don't have very many options of what to do. And then for the people who have managed to get out, which are mighty few, but there are some here in Buffalo, there's some, but it's very hard to get the most of any of the people who are here in Buffalo. They've come largely through because they helped with the military or the government. So those are the people that the U.S. was very concerned about getting out. The people that this group that Kathy Kelly was talking about, those are people that we knew who were working as peacemakers and not working with the U.S. government or with the U.S. military, I should say, or with the Afghan government, but actually working in the community. In some ways, some of the direct service needs that for the community that they looked after. So these people, they don't have a way out. But yet, even for the people who've come out who were working with the U.S. military or with the Afghan government, they are worried about their people at home. And in fact, they're all the more worried because their family, any family left behind, could be a target, because the Taliban, who knows that they had people who were helping, or that they're related to people that were helping the U.S. government, that makes them, suspect or, untrustworthy, et cetera. They can be penalized. And this is where some of the people that we had been working with are very much under threat. And they've been beaten up, detained, questioned. Their storefront was searched and really ransacked. Information was taken so that the people would check on, the Taliban would try to find some of these kids who were working for women's rights. And, they had a bicycle brigade kind of a thing that was for boys and girls. So the girls were included, and, women's rights were in fact, in their structure, when they had, for their different committees of different kinds or working on the different projects, they would have a boy and a girl working on the projects, and share the work. So, they're just wonderful, wonderful, inspiring youth that we just appreciate so much. And, you know, the loving hearts that they have shown, the deep commitment that they have shown, makes it all the harder that when they do leave because of the danger to themselves, that the worries for their family, for their friends, and for their country is really overwhelming. So I think there are so many ways that we can try and help. And one of them is, you know, you could donate and earmark it for the Afghan next generation. If you put the Afghan next generation in a donation to the Western New York Peace Center, it will go towards this effort. And some of these people's, for example, you know, some of the people in Pakistan, or for some of the efforts to get people flying them actually out when they have an opportunity to get a visa somewhere. You could do that. You could offer to be on the buddy system. So I would just encourage you to call or email the Western New York Peace Center or myself at victoryross9@gmail.com, and we could get you on the list for this bi-weekly call. And you could become a buddy to one of the people that has enough English for you to be able to talk with them. One of the Afghan youth that are somewhere where they can actually communicate with people, but might need some help and support. So that could be financial support, but it could be moral support, and it could be help with paperwork for applying for visas in different countries. So we found that Brazil, Portugal, some of the countries that wouldn't necessarily be on the top of people's lists, where the cost of living is not so high, are some of the countries that are more accepting and ready to take those young people in. And then when they do, how glad they are, as you were just hearing, how wonderful it is in Portugal. So that, you know, I was very grateful to have Kathy and Basir on for most of the show. I hope that you have found it informative about what's going on in Afghanistan right now and what small bits we can do to help. Another thing that people can still do to help is back to that Senator Grassley question about why people are not paying attention to the SIGAR report, the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, why that's being ignored, where all that money is gone, and also to urge that our federal government to release those funds to Afghanistan, that they should have their own $11 billion that was from their central bank. So there's plenty to do. Just let us know if you want to be more involved in this effort. In the meanwhile, this is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love.